Welcome to the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, January 29th, 2021. My name is Pam, and let's begin with our first article. Teaching the Capitol riot is tricky, especially if the teacher was there, by Sarah Matusik. In New York, Paula Wilson's children watched the Capitol siege unfold on TV from their Wisconsin living room, texting her updates as she worked an emergency room shift. When she got home, her son showed her a post from his 10th grade social studies teacher about his upcoming travel plans for January 6th. Before he left town, the teacher, Jeff Taff, had assigned the class homework and explained that he was headed to Washington for a few days. I am sorry, but standing up for election integrity and our right to vote in fair elections is too important for me not to be there, he wrote, according to a photo of his post on Google Classroom. I couldn't believe it, said Miss Wilson. I was just thinking he has a right to do whatever he wants, but why would he post this for all his kids? The presence of school staff at or near the Capitol on January 6th, when a rally in support of former President Donald Trump led to violence, has complicated the task of school districts across the country. Many have wrestled with convening class discussions about the polarizing events of that day while respecting employees' political views and the political passions in the communities they serve. Some districts have been forced to consider disciplining personnel at a time when they're also under sharp scrutiny from parents for their pandemic plans. While teachers are held to a heightened standard as role models, they're also often held to a heightened standard as Americans, says Janet Decker, associate professor at the Indiana University School of Education. Some educators are unsurprised to see the nation's fraught electoral politics crashing the classroom, stress testing the role of educators as guides to civics and history. Every other controversy in our society that's playing out appears in our public schools too, says Tom Hutton, Interim Executive Director of Education Law Association. A district investigates. Ms. Wilson says her son's revelations about Mr. Taft troubled her, so she reported her concerns to the school. An image of another Google Classroom post by the teacher appeared to link to a video about claims of widespread voter fraud. Burlington Area School District has placed the teacher, whom it hasn't named, and who used personal days for his travel, on paid administrative leave, pending an investigation. Legal experts say this is standard. When the district posted a statement to its Facebook page January 7th, one user wrote that the district had no right to discipline the teacher. Another seemed displeased with the district's non-action approach. Meanwhile, the district investigation is widening its scope beyond an assignment posted to Google Classroom the week of January 6th, according to spokeswoman Julie Thomas. In an email to the Monitor, Mr. Taft's attorney, Todd Terry, said the teacher prioritizes his students' education. He added that his client is cooperating with the investigation while defending himself against misinformation, venom, and outright lies. Ms. Wilson, the 10th grader's mom, said she has broader concerns than the initial Google Classroom post. She said the family has reported other allegations of politicized remarks made by the teacher during class. Responding to a question about how districts can engage constructively with their communities during a time of political polarization, Ms. Thomas said via email that schools can create a safe place to learn. We encourage our students and staff to be kind, she wrote. Ms. Wilson's fiancé, John Fettplace, was met with less than kindness after speaking out. The Burlington native began receiving online threats after publicly questioning Mr. Taft's instruction. It really doesn't make us want to be part of the community anymore, he said. First Amendment rights? Educators aren't the only ones facing fallout from January 6th. Since the pro-Trump march developed into a siege that left 5 dead, private and public employers countrywide have investigated and disciplined staff for potential wrongdoing. School district employees in Pennsylvania, Arkansas, California, and elsewhere have drawn scrutiny for their attendance. Some have publicly pushed back, including 2 bus drivers who sued a West Virginia superintendent after placing them on paid leave. Last summer's mostly peaceful racial justice demonstrations also became a flashpoint for divisive politics in U.S. schools. A Texas public school teacher was placed on paid leave for hanging Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ posters in her classroom. In Vermont, a public school principal was fired for Facebook comments relating to the Black Lives Matter movement, which the school board found to be derogatory against African Americans. Legal experts say public employees' First Amendment rights are typically protected unless they were found breaking the law. If you just went to D.C., attended the rally, came home, and weren't involved in any activities at the Capitol building itself, it's highly likely there'd be nothing that the school district could do, even if they disagreed with you, says Jim Hanks, a retired education law attorney in West Des Moines, Iowa. But some may have done more than that. So far, at least one educator faces criminal charges linked to the Capitol siege. A former school occupational therapist from Ohio, Christine Priola, was arrested and charged in federal court this month for unlawful activities at the Capitol. Social media users helped law enforcement identify her in photos from January 6th, when she allegedly appeared inside the Senate chambers with a sign spelled in red, "The children cry out for justice." The following day, Ms. Priola sent a resignation letter to Cleveland Metropolitan School District that noted her plans to expose the global evil of human trafficking and pedophilia, allegedly in the government. Echoing QAnon conspiracy theories, Ms. Priola did not respond to requests for comment. Blowback in the community? Other factors complicate public school staff members' rights. In a case involving a California state prosecutor, the Supreme Court ruled in 2006 that public employees' speech is limited when made pursuant to their official duties. For districts weighing how to respond to what teachers do outside class, public blowback adds another twist. If a public employee's First Amendment activity causes such disruption in a community that you are rendered ineffective as a teacher, you could lose your job or face other discipline, says Mr. Hanks. For Jason Berry, an elementary school PE teacher in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, his presence at the January 6 protests put him in an uncomfortable spotlight. But after his employer, the Susquehanna Township School District, investigated him, it said his actions didn't violate their policy and were protected by the First Amendment. Mr. Berry says he's grateful that he's been cleared to keep teaching. Susquehanna did a wonderful job and looked at the facts, he said. Mr. Berry maintains that he did not engage in the Capitol violence, and the district confirmed it, had approved his personal days off. That day, a Christian TV network showed a video of him and his friends praying and worshiping at the rally. In the clip, Mr. Berry wears a Trump hat. A photo of the clip was then passed around social media out of context, he said. A community member began an online petition January 6th that called for Mr. Berry's removal, pointing him out among other maskless insurrectionists. It garnered over 5,000 supporters. A week later, the petition organizers clarified in a post that there was no current evidence to substantiate that the teacher was violent or stormed the Capitol. Mr. Berry says he was religiously, not politically motivated to drive to Washington with church friends January 6th. He said he went to pray for the nation. It was a day when a lot of different decisions would be made, and so I thought it was a great opportunity to come up with believers and pray for the United States, says Mr. Berry, who is a Christian. Mr. Berry says he's moving on from the attack on his beliefs. I choose to forgive them. In a January 11th video, Susquehanna Superintendent Tamara Willis condemned the Capitol violence and said she welcomed the public's concern raised by the investigation. I am charged with making decisions for this school district in all of its diversity based upon evidence, even when emotions are running high and public opinion seemingly pressures us to do otherwise, she said. Educators shouldn't shy away from teaching these events, says Professor Decker from Indiana University. We need more civic education, not only for teachers and school employees, but also for students, so that people understand the limitations to their freedom of speech rights, she said. This next article is titled Meet the Team Shaking Up Climate Models by Doug Struck. Thomas Trouter Chamberlain was tall and rugged with a flowing beard and raucous mustache, popular in the late 1800s. As a young geology professor, he hiked the flatlands of southeast Wisconsin, surveying tracts of long-gone glaciers. It was popular at the time to speculate on what caused the rise and fall of ice ages, and Chamberlain seized on one theory that pointed to a gas. The effect of the carbon dioxide and water vapor is to blanket the Earth with a thermally absorbent envelope, he wrote in 1899. He concluded that doubling that gas in the atmosphere would raise the temperature of the Earth by 8 or 9 degrees Celsius. This relationship between carbon dioxide and the Earth's temperature came to be known as the greenhouse effect. Chamberlain was right about the linkage, though he was off in the numbers. The numbers are still elusive. We've grown leaps and bounds in our ability to collect climate data, particularly in the last 30 years since we've had satellites, said Zeke Hosfather, a climate scientist at the Breakthrough Institute, a think tank in Oakland, California. But at the end of the day, we need to know what is likely to happen in the next few decades and the rest of the century and centuries to come. And for that, you need some sort of model. The science of climate modeling, forecasting, has produced 30 or more different versions that try to predict how changes in the atmosphere will alter the climate. All point in the same direction. Add greenhouse gases and warming will follow, but the details vary. There are some things where there are very robust results and other things where those results are not so robust, says Gavin Schmidt, who heads NASA's respected climate modeling program at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies. But the variances push skeptics to dismiss the whole field. There's enough stuff out there that people can sort of cherry pick to support their preconceptions, says Dr. Hosfather. Climate skeptics were arguing that climate models always predict too much warming. After studying models done in the past 50 years, Dr. Hosfather says it turns out they did remarkably well. But climate modelers acknowledged accuracy must improve in order to plot a way through the climate crisis. Now, a team of climatologists, oceanographers, and computer scientists on the east and west U.S. coasts have launched a bold race to do just that. They have gathered some of the brightest experts from around the world to start to build a new modern climate model. They hope to corral the vast flow of data from sensors in space, on land, and in the ocean, and enlist machine learning, a kind of artificial intelligence, to bring their model alive and provide new insight into what many believe is the most pressing threat facing the planet. Their goal is accurate climate predictions that can tell local policymakers, builders, and planners what changes to expect by when, with the kind of numerical likelihood that weather forecasters now use to describe, say, a 70% chance of rain. Tapio Schneider, a German-born climatologist at the California Institute of Technology and Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, leads the effort. We don't have good information for planning, Dr. Schneider told a gathering of scientists in 2019. Models cannot tell New York City how high to build sea walls, or California how much to spend to protect its vast infrastructure. They simply vary too much. For example, in 2015 in Paris, 196 countries agreed there will be alarming consequences if the planet warms by 2 degrees Celsius, measured from the industrial age. But when will we get there? Of 29 leading climate models, the answer ranges from 20 to 40 more years, almost the difference of a human generation under current levels of emission. That range is too wide to set timetables for action, which will require sweeping new infrastructure. Everything from replacing fossil fuels to switching to electric vehicles to elevating homes. It's important to come up with better predictions and come up with them fast, Dr. Schneider says. A blank slate? More climate modelers use past data when they create a model, but that means there's a fire hose of fresh climate measurements that go mostly unused. From satellites, balloons, ships, planes, weather stations, and thousands of sensors floating in the seas, Dr. Schneider wants to plug into that stream and force a new model to learn from it. The crux is to use more data, period, he says. He and his colleagues have spent 2 years figuring out how to do it. The original idea was not to start over, Dr. Schneider says. He talked with a friend at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Raffaele Fieri, an Italian researcher who, befitting his name, has a penchant for automotive analogies. They realized, Dr. Ferrari says, that you can take a race car and start replacing parts, but pretty soon it becomes easier to build a new race car. The two men had been friends since they met one summer while graduate students in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Dr. Ferrari pursued oceanography and helped build a much-used model for the oceans called the MIT General Circulation Model. Oceans and the land are intimate partners with the atmosphere, but they often are studied separately. Dr. Schneider and colleagues at Caltech studied the air. Dr. Ferrari and MIT researchers study the sea. Both men realized the advantage of joining forces. In 2017 and 18, Dr. Schneider convened a series of workshops at Caltech, grandly called the Future of Earth System Modeling. We just invite the best people in the world to hash through the topic, he says. Their consensus was that the development of climate models was struggling. Something was not working, Dr. Ferrari said. They were looking for new ideas. Gradually, they concluded that they should build a new model. They named it the Climate Modeling Alliance. The acronym CLIMA is climate in Italian and Spanish. It is scary to start with a blank slate, Dr. Schneider says. But Dr. Ferrari notes, by starting from scratch, you can clean up a lot of what has happened over time. Building a disruptor. It also is audacious. The group mapped out a project that will take at least 5 years of work by teams at Caltech, MIT, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and other institutions. Tens of thousands of hours of research. It will take money, at least $25 million. That typically would come from government grants, but that appeared unlikely early on because of the Trump administration's disaffection with science. And if threatened to ruffle feathers in the climate science world, especially at the established modeling centers like Dr. Schmidt's NASA group at Goddard, I think they have oversold what they can do, Dr. Schmidt said. Is a new model needed? They would say yes. I would probably say no. There are 3 main U.S. government-funded climate centers in New York City, Boulder, Colorado, and Princeton, New Jersey. Rather than compete with the established centers for federal financing, CLIMA turned to private money. Soon it won a pledge from former Google Chief Executive Officer Eric Schmidt and Wendy Schmidt, whose philanthropy for the environment ranges from oil cleanup competitions to deep-sea submersibles. They pledged most of the funds needed for the first 3 years, and with smaller grants, CLIMA launched on September 11, 2018. John Marshall, who developed the oceans model at MIT, says getting funds from outside the government is a hugely important part of the project. I see the project as a disruptor, like an Uber project, he says. Any organization which has been going for a long time, it kind of ossifies. The other distinguished features Dr. Marshall notes is those working on it. The model is actually less important than the team of scientists that you have around it, he contends. In fact, the 60 to 70 researchers and programmers in the CLIMA group represent a veritable United Nations. Somebody put a map on the wall at the CLIMA house, a converted provost home at Caltech, and asked everyone to pinpoint their homes. There were a lot of needles, Dr. Schneider said. A climate model that learns. CLIMA decided on an innovative approach to harness machine learning. Satellite and sensor information is freely available, much of it for weather forecasters. Dr. Schneider envisions training their model with the last 3 decades of data and then routinely feeding it the latest updates. The model itself could learn from the data and calibrate its performance with formulas refined by AI, even as the climate changes. Climate models work by dividing the globe into a grid that allows computers to replicate conditions by calculating atmospheric formulas for each grid cell. These are not simple equations that focus only on the level of carbon dioxide. Models now handle hundreds of factors that influence climate, ranging from solar radiation, particles from volcanoes, dust, ocean spray, and savannas, to agricultural fields and sea ice. They do this in grid cells typically about 15 to 30 miles square and a few miles deep. CLIMA strives for much smaller cells, but to model Earth's whole atmosphere, they would need supercomputers thousands of times faster than presently exist. Instead, CLIMA will drill down on a sampling of smaller grids, some little more than 100 feet square and 15 feet deep, and use AI to teach the rest of the grid formulas from those samples. By focusing on this level of detail, the CLIMA group hopes to pick up influences on the climate that are often just roughly estimated. Chief on Dr. Schneider's list is to gauge the influence of clouds. Low, flat stratocumulus clouds gird huge swaths of the planet at any given time, but they are so wispy there is no good way to include them in the models. They are really important for Earth's climates. They cool Earth by about 8 degrees Celsius globally simply by reflecting sunlight. Dr. Schneider says, existing climate models underestimate their effect. He calls it a blind spot, creating large uncertainties in the models. At extreme levels of greenhouse gases, Dr. Schneider says stratocumulus clouds could disappear entirely, jolting temperatures of the Earth. It might be one reason there were crocodiles in the Arctic 50 million years ago, the most recent hot period in Earth's history. But the team had a problem. While computers have gotten faster and faster, the very mechanics used by computer models is creaky. They have to tell a computer what to do step by step in a language the computer can decipher. Since 1957, scientists have often used a programming language called Fortran. It is fast. Once written, it causes computers to act with great efficiency. That efficiency is vital when the number crunching is as big and complex as it is in a climate model, carrying out trillions of calculations per second. But Fortran is clunky and laborious to write. It must be further modified for today's supercomputers. For younger programs, it's kind of like ancient Latin. If you tell undergrads you want help writing Fortran, nobody wants to get involved, said Dr. Ferrari. They think it's the end of their career. Newer languages, there are dozens with names like Python, C, and C++, are easier to write, but they take more time to process in the computer. For the CLIMA modelers, that was a dilemma. The man with the answer occupied an office on the 7th floor of MIT's C-SAIL building, the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab. Alan Elderman is known for bringing his pet corgi to class, then dispatching students to find it when it wanders off. He hasn't figured out that the dog doesn't sit there, chuckles a colleague. Dr. Elderman also is an award-winning mathematician who pondered the computer language conundrum and developed a new language in 2009. He called it Julia, and it bridged the language gap, he says, as fast as Fortran and easier to use than Python. In September 2018, he got a Dear Professor Elderman email from Dr. Ferrari, and 6 hours later, 3 fellow MIT professors who had been at the Caltech climate modeling sessions were perched on the narrow couch of his office. They said they thought they wanted to use Julia, Dr. Elderman recalls. He immediately saw Julia and climate as a perfect match. I was tickled pink, really. But Julia had relatively few users, and in California, Dr. Schneider was worried it might flop. Everyone was excited about Julia, so much so that I was very nervous because it felt like too much groupthink, he recalls. What we're trying to do has its own risks. Do we really want to load the risk of a new language on top of it? But the simplicity of using Julia was a game changer. When the CLIMA group began to cautiously use the new language, Dr. Elderman suddenly realized that other scientists and younger graduate students were poking their heads into his lab to learn about this new whiz-fast programming tool. People from different disciplines were interacting. I didn't see this coming, he said. The group at CLIMA was quickly convinced there was no way we could have done it with another language, Dr. Ferrari says. After 3 or 4 months, we realized there was no way we could go back. Julia paid off for us better than they would have imagined, Dr. Schneider admits. An ambitious goal. With Julia, the team released CLIMA 0.1, part of the first version of the model, in June. Dr. Schneider says their work is ahead of schedule, and he is encouraged. They are a step towards providing climate information that will be useful at a local or regional level, helping predict the frequency of droughts, extreme rainfalls, heat waves, and major storms. Dr. Schneider even envisions a cell phone app that could give information to anyone contemplating, say, the purchase of a house or planning future crops for a farm. You need granular information on a local level, Dr. Schneider said. The challenge in the climate area is how to make information actionable. There's a large gap between what we scientists communicate and what people can actually use. To bridge that, they are looking to weather forecasters. When they tell you that tomorrow it might rain, you don't know exactly what to do. You want to know whether the probability is 10% or 100%, Dr. Ferrari says. If it's 10%, you're going to get an umbrella. If it's 100%, you might not go for a hike. So knowing that is crucial. Ultimately, he and Dr. Schneider says they expect to achieve that. We'll see at the end, Dr. Ferrari says. It's always a mistake to say that you shouldn't try something new, because that's how you change the world. Well, that concludes the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, January 29th. My name is Pam. Thank you for having me in your home. Stay safe until we meet here again. Be blessed and make it a great day.